be chairing the meeting on the left, Palestine elections. And as I said, we've got three fantastic speakers. I will introduce each speaker before they get up to speak. And then at the end of the three speakers, we'll open up the floor for discussion. Before we begin, can I just ask you to make sure their phones are either switched off or on silent? I think we have some fantastic speakers, as I said, but what we don't want is any kind of interruption and then chatting it up to the music going on all the rest of it. So please do make sure your phones are either switched off or on silent. Obviously this is a big room, but there may be people coming in late. So I'm not asking you all to, sit tight together. But if anything is on the name, you can just budget a bit so that if any latecomers come in, they can just get on to the edge seats and just to make it easy for people so people don't get disturbed. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Obviously we've had some fantastic luck. We've just had an election and the results are out. But in that election, there were some fantastic independent candidates from various other groups that stood particularly against Saga and the policy around Feinstein. And I want to introduce our first speaker, who's Andrew Feinstein, and he stood in Holborn and St Pancras. And it's really important to say that is Saga's constituency. And I'm right to say this is the first time he stood. And being the first time independent candidate, he managed to get over half of Saga's votes. Bearing in mind that Saga is a leader of the opposition, knew that they were going to win, soon they were going to win in the next 5 minutes. And to get that result against someone like that is absolutely fantastic. I'm really proud to have Andrew speak today. So Andrew.
So, soon after we were elected in South Africa, I was sent as part of the delegation to the US, which was obviously hugely significant, and this was the first ANC in-government delegation. And we went to Atlanta because it was the home of Martin Luther King Jr., which had significance for us in South Africa. And we arrived at Atlanta Airport. Some of you might know Atlanta has the global headquarters of CNN for its city. But in addition, it is also the global headquarters of the Coca-Cola Corporation. So a really nice sort of double act there. And the mayor of Atlanta, who I'm sure was funded by the Coca-Cola Corporation amongst others, and who was actually done for political corruption a few years later, was a professional basketball player. Some of my height was about 8'10". And he greeted us from behind a lectern that was an illuminated Coke can. And after he had said hello and welcomed us and everything, my boss at the time, sent me to respond. So I walked up the back of this little Coke can and I said a few words and I came back down. And I didn't really know Turkey that well at the time. So I said to him, "Chief, is that okay?" And he said, "Yeah, what you said was fine. It's just a pity all you could see sticking out of the top of the Coke can was a very sweaty bald head." So I honestly think I've developed some sort of an aversion to being behind anything when I speak. So let me make the first point. And that is that all of the independent campaigns, and we've got two candidates here who did incredibly well. And so many of the independents did incredibly well. But the most important thing about our campaigns were twofold. One is we gave people choice and an option. We prevented the ruling elite. Let's remember what this election was. This was like time on the playground for our little sclerotic ruling elite. It wasn't a real democratic election. I mean, Labour has this huge majority, having got just over 36% of the vote. I mean, you can't call that a functioning democracy, first of all. Second of all, with the commercial and mainstream media that we have in this country, you can't work on the assumption that this is an informed electorate, making a decision on the basis of factual information. Because one thing we know the commercial media are extremely good at is their complete paucity of meaningful facts and information that goes against their narrative. So we've had a partially democratic election. But what these campaigns did is it refused to allow the ruling elite to remove Gaza from the campaign. But we didn't just talk about Gaza as though horrific as it is, and I'm writing a book at the moment which I can now get back to, called Making a Killing, how the West profits from slaughter in Yemen and Gaza. Because we need to understand the economics of the arms trade, and I see Lindsay here, who I'm sure is going to talk about this in far more detail from a structural perspective. We need to understand how the trade in weapons, which is the most corrupt trade on the planet, accounting for 40% of all corruption in all world trade, oils the wheels of our political systems. Because those bribes don't only go to Saudi Arabia and to Israel for their ruling elites, but they feed back to countries like the UK and the US, and then land up with donations to the two main political parties, except Labour when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge, obviously, when it was actually a democratic socialist party. Remember those days? But also to individual politicians. So that Tony Blair, we estimate conservatively, has made over £110 million personally since leaving office, directly from the decision to invade Iraq and his association with BAE Systems and other British arms companies. So we can talk about Gaza in the context of how we are subsidizing with our tax pounds not only slaughter in Israel through our illegal arms exports to Israel, but we're also subsidizing the corruption of our own political system. Absurd. But the second point about Gaza that's incredibly important is that as independents we managed to link Gaza to the daily local issues of people in our areas. So pointing out the fact that because of the tens of billions of pounds subsidizing BAE, Kinetic and other British and Israeli arms companies like Elbit Systems, because we're spending over £200 billion renewing our so-called nuclear deterrent, which is a complete oxymoron, that is money that should be invested in our local communities. In the case of Holborn and St Pancras, where we are now, we have a massive housing crisis. We have a Labour-controlled council trying to push poorer people out of the borough, demolishing council estates so they can build luxury apartments, office blocks for Google. I don't know if you've heard of Google. It's a tiny, struggling, small or micro business in our community that our council subsidized to the tune of £1.5 million. So they could build a fancy office at Pancras Square next to the council building. Because that's what they spend our money on. And of course retail space, because they get better rents from all of those things, and they don't have these pesky working class tenants giving them shit, telling them what they need done, which they ignore. But it's the linking of these issues, the NHS, etc., that is so important. And of course, we brought out volunteers in unprecedented numbers in all these campaigns. Local people and people from around the UK who were just desperate to do something tangible politically in such a dark time. So, some of the independents did really well. I mean, are you aware that before this election, there have been 4 independent candidates elected to the British Parliament in over 50 years. So the achievement of this election is remarkable. But of course the mainstream media is going to ignore that. You know, the fact that there was a swing from Labour to an independent in the putative Prime Minister's constituency of 18.9% is just bizarre. It really is bizarre. And the fact that he is the first person to enter Downing Street, not having increased his personal majority in his own constituency. And what that says is far less about some short-bald schmuck from Cape Town is it actually says that at a grassroots level, in our local community, there is a visceral hatred of this man's politics. And there are similar stories in many of the seats where independents stood. And this is what we need to build on. So I'm going to take 1 more minute just to try and describe how we build on this. And these are just my opinions. And I'm producing a discussion document that we're going to discuss locally in Camden, and will then hopefully start discussing nationally. Because I find myself on the steering committee of about 7 different initiatives to create a national movement. And one of the things we've got to do is unify. There is no point that there is no point us creating 7 different movements. It will be a laughing stock. And this is an existential moment in British politics. And we, the left, have to be prepared for it. So first, we've got to build locally. So we're going to draw all of those incredibly enthusiastic, energetic, passionate people, many of whom are very young people, into a community structure locally that is going to do a number of things. First, we're going to develop a model to hold our Member of Parliament to account. And when he doesn't turn up in our constituency to account to us, because he only turned up on the night of the result. That was the only time he was in the constituency in the entire campaign. Really committed to his local constituency. We're going to develop a model to hold him to account. When he doesn't turn up, we're going to turn up at both of his offices as well. Secondly, my day job, which I'm much too tired to get back to at the moment, is as an investigative researcher and writer on the global arms trade and on a phenomenon we call state capture. And we're going to train people in the community to investigate not only our MP and his government, but also his local council. Which in terms of housing, my instinct is there are so many red flags for corruption. And we've got to train local people to do that sort of ongoing work. Then thirdly, we're in talks with ACORN to train dozens of community organizers to address the terrible housing crisis that we have in the area. And finally, the chair will be glad to hear, finally, we're going to use that local model as a basis to build something national. And what we've got to build nationally has to be inclusive and welcoming to as many people as possible without us compromising our progressive principles. Thanks very much.
I'm sure many of you will know him already. I was a lifelong activist around Palestine. Many times even before it was popular, he was out campaigning on the Palestine issue and has a track record of campaigning on Palestine. But it's also very rooted in Preston, where he stood as a candidate in the general election on Thursday, and someone who I know has been a complete inspiration to me when I first got involved in political activism. So Michael, over to yourself.
Well, thanks very much for the kind word, Isla, and thanks very much for triggering my height complex, Andrew. But I want to take us back. I never thought I'd be standing here talking about elections. I thought I'd put that behind me 10 years ago when I stopped being a councillor. But obviously what changed my opinion, our opinion, why we thought it was important to stand with the events that had happened on the streets since October. In fact, in Preston, at the very first demonstration of 4,000 people, representatives of the local mosque came to me and said, Michael, we need to stand against Labour whenever the next general election is. I was appalled, I was shocked, I was like, there's absolutely no way that's happening. My life's moved on from there, I'm definitely not doing that. I said it repeatedly for the next several weeks, but nobody listened. We then got to November, and obviously when there was the first vote in the House of Parliament and the majority of MPs voted against the ceasefire, the demand no ceasefire, no vote became the chant and the slogan of the movement. And at that point things started to grow with some speed. But again in Preston I was holding out until we got to about January. And in January, several different people then came to me and asked me to stand, and at that point I said, well, I would do it, but on condition that we had a hustings. We had to have, in my opinion, a hustings. We had to have local people having the chance to put their name forward and to have some sort of democratic mandate from the constituency. And so we had a meeting in March in Preston. 160, it was hard to tell because there was so many people outside. Came along and we voted. It was a contested event. 6 people voted for the other candidate, depending on how many you think were in the room. 142, 162, 182, whatever voted for me, so there was no getting out of it from that point onwards. I'd actually retired 2 days before, so I had 2 days of retirement in my life. I just retired. It was the best 2 days of my life, you know. So from that point we obviously had a focus, but we were completely taken aback by what happened 6 weeks ago. So we didn't even have a bank account. We didn't have a bank account. We didn't have a registered political party because that takes 7 months. So we knew we wouldn't have any insignia on the ballot. We didn't have any money. We were standing as an independent, but I was always very, very clear about that because I come from the west of Scotland, and when I was growing up, these were solid Labour seats at that time. More or less back to that situation as well. But if somebody stood as an independent, it's just because they were too ashamed to call themselves a Tory. So I was ashamed that way, and I was like, oh God, that's going to be my legacy, how can I do this? So we said, of course, we're standing as an independent, meaning we are independent of the political establishment, we're independent of the main political parties, but we're absolutely rooted and part of the movement for Palestine and the movement for by the other independents. We were independent of the establishment, we were not independent of the movement, we were part and parcel of the movement itself. And we then had to launch a campaign, so no money, no bank account, had to throw things together, but what we did have was the enthusiasm of the pro-Palestine movement in Preston. Preston is one parliamentary constituency, so you can work that out from your own area. It's not a huge area. Somebody asked where it was and said, is it in Manchester? We'll talk about that later. But every day we had at least 30 people from Preston out, leafleting, canvassing, making sure the meetings were going on. We had meetings with mosque committees, with OMA, with the Hindu Cultural Centre, with various different organisations. The trade unions put on one hustling. I was the only candidate to turn up. Nobody else turned up at that trade union hustings. We fought the campaign on a basis of what we call Palestine Plus. So yes, Palestine was at the root of it, but we also had to talk about those other essential items that connected in with people's everyday experience. The cost of living crisis, the NHS, education, social care, pensions, and that's the campaign that we took out on the streets of Preston to try and win people over on the grounds that the political establishment don't talk to us, don't represent us, don't listen to us about all these issues, and that Gaza is the catalyst. So, what did it look like in Preston? Well, in Preston, I think there was 3 elections going on at the same time. Out in the peripheral, white working class estates, it was incredibly difficult to get people to talk about politics because they thought all politicians were, frankly, shitebags. They thought that they ignored them, they never listened to them, they didn't want anything to do with them, so why would we be any different? And that's quite difficult because we are putting ourselves forward as politicians. But we did have that argument with them, and we did, on the electoral returns, we did win votes in those areas. Then there was a second area. This was in what I would call the white, skilled, professional, working class areas where there's social workers, teachers, skilled workers, NHS workers. And my overarching experience there was immense confusion. They didn't like Starmer. They were prepared to listen to us. Nowhere in Preston did we get any hostile reception. They were prepared to listen to us. The MP in Preston is hopeless, and they were prepared to talk about that. But they really hated the Tories, and they wanted to get rid of the Tories. And by the end of it, I think that many of them had moved back to that position, but voted Labour, not with any enthusiasm, but just because they hated the Tories. And then there was the third area. And here there was a rebellion that was similar to what happened in 2017. This was the Muslim communities of Preston, in which I have never experienced anything like it in any election I've ever stood on before, but I would walk down the street outside the fruit shops, people would come out the fruit shops, give me free fruit, they would take it home and say, we know it's the 4th of July, Michael, we're all with you. The taxi would stop, the taxi driver would speak to me, and the people in the taxi would go, we're all waiting for the 4th of July, Michael, we know what's happening. I have never, ever known anything like that in my life before. We had people out canvassing, we had people out leafleting, and we also asked people to phone a friend. And what I've now become aware of is that hundreds and hundreds of people across the Muslim community worked their way through the phone book to make sure that everybody knew they had to vote for Michael, had to go on the 4th of July, and they had to get every member of their family out. It was a rebellion in the Muslim community. Particularly strong amongst the young people. You know, there was 3 school elections on general election day in Preston, and I won them all. Also the future and the way that young people were radicalised around those things. So, let me just then take a step to the side because I've got 3 minutes left, and I want to raise something else, and that's about how we as the left think about this. And I want to just go through some figures. Because there was 60 left independents, people like Maxine and Andy, myself, Leanne, Jeremy, whatever. Of those 60, 26 saved their votes, and many got fantastic good votes, and 5 got elected. Out of 60, that's a great hit. Yeah. And I also want to look at some of the other left networks as well and what they did, because I think it's important to put into the argument about how we move forward. So the Workers' Party stood 155 candidates, 28 got deposits, many of them just. Tusk stood 39 candidates, their best vote was 2.2% of the vote, nobody saved their deposit. The SLP, 13 candidates, their best vote was 1.2%, and the Communist Party of Britain stood 14 and their best vote was 1.1%. So what does this tell us? Well, for me, what it says is, if you turn up with a programme and present it to the electorate and nothing changes, you don't get votes. Yeah. If you're part of a movement, if you're an organic part of the movement, if you come out of the movement for change, then you can engage people, then you can get votes, then you can translate that, and you combine the street with the ballot box in that way, and that's where you got our best votes, and that needs to be a crucial lesson for us as we go forward to build these networks of left, socialist, independence. And the final thing for me is that across the country, of course, Reform did well. We didn't get second in Preston. It's one of the 2 places that he didn't get second in the north and west of Britain. We got second. So we beat everybody else. We got better votes than the Tories and the Lib Dems combined. But Reform So I want to take us back to that earlier part of what the disengaged white communities around our constituencies. And they're the ones that are maybe attracted to the anti-establishment of reform, and we know that they're not anti-establishment, so the task for us is immediate, it's necessary. We have to be the ones that go onto the estates because we are the anti-establishment organisations and networks. We have to be the ones that fight for decent housing, for proper rents, for proper jobs, for better healthcare, for better education, for better bus services, for less potholes in the roads or whatever it is that you want to do. We need to be the ones that express that at local level, at national level, because if we don't step up to the task, reform will kick people on and they will step in. So it's an immediate task for us all to think about how we take the lessons from the last few days and how we generalise that to make sure that there is an appropriate, decent, strong, left alternative at the ballot boxes from now on.
Very good.
And my final speaker of the session is Maxine, who's a member of the Socialist Reference Party and stood in Sheffield.
Right, first of all I want to say it's great being here at Marxism, and I know that we were all celebrating the Tories' demise, but we all know that we need so much more than that. And I absolutely agree. We know that Labour's landslide victory was really a victory for a vote against the Tories and not a vote for Starmer. And when you look at the turnout, which was 60%, it's the lowest turnout in 20 years, and historically, the second lowest turnout since 2018. This tells you that thousands upon thousands of people in this country did not turn out to vote and didn't feel that there was anybody who was going to represent them at all. And hardly an endorsement for Starmer's has been said. In Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough, where I stood, really we had only been approached a few weeks before the election had been called, and we were approached by local people and asked would we stand. And I was considering it, and I more or less said yes I would, and then of course they decided to call the election, which was much to the shock of most people. And to get 8%, 2,537 votes in such a short campaign really is quite amazing. It can only be understood in terms of the massive and sustained movement that we have seen now for 9 months taking place over the question of the genocide in Palestine, in which we continue to see massive marches taking place. And I think it's fantastic that there was a march yesterday. It sends a warning shot that we will not be going away, and I understand another march has already been called. I've been very heavily involved in the Palestinian movement. I've spoken on many of the rallies. I'm the trade union rep on the Sheffield Palestine Coalition. I've organised the coaches to London, workplace days of action, and I stood like many others because I could not abide by the way in which the politicians were trying to erase Palestine from the whole debate in the general election. I couldn't stand by and watch 40,000 people having lost their lives, 20,000 people actually missing, and 4,000 people who they suspect are buried amongst the rubble. People can't even bury their dead. And I couldn't really stand by and watch them. The amount of ammunition that has been used today in Gaza exceeds the amount that was used in the major offensives during the Second World War. And I think that that is an absolute disgrace. And the fact that our the MP I stood against, Jill Furness, never once voted for the ceasefire, never once voted to stop the arms to Israel, and therefore I think she was complicit in genocide. There's an ironic thing about it, because actually the weakest MP in the whole of Sheffield stands in the poorest area of Sheffield, one of the 10% most deprived constituencies in the country, and that's the MP. And actually she turned around and refused to come and debate at the hustings, and she quoted security reasons, like we're all going to attack her when she arrived. Actually, I thought you might have some security issues if you were in Gaza at the moment, if you were suffering from a hostage. It fed into this agenda that somehow people who march for Palestine are hate marchers, which the Tories said, instead of being peace marchers. And again, I really raged against that, and I think it really backfired on her in many, many ways. And I think you could feel the anger and discontent of people in the constituency, the disenfranchisement. I said, it's a 10% poorest constituency. That means overcrowding, rats, black mould, damn, lack of funding for education, lack of funding for the health service. And the people in the constituency felt like they were people who were not bothered about. They didn't care about them. They felt like they were ignored, really. And therefore it was so important to link the two issues together, really, to say that people could have an alternative and a voice. And I felt that actually if an MP was prepared to allow what was happening without voting for a ceasefire, actually actually she had lost her humanity and she was not bothered about the people who she was supposed to represent. I just want to say there's some fantastic things happening in such a short time. I mean, we had a brilliant cavalcade that went around the constituency. I don't know how many votes that got for us, but it made people feel happy. It made people feel that there was something happening in the constituency. And a woman followed me into the car park after we'd been driving around and jumped out of the car, made me do a video, and then said, right, I'm going to go out and campaign for you in Winkerbank. A long-standing Labour Party member in one of the local cafes said to me, I'm going to give you my votes. There's no way I can possibly vote for Labour any longer. What's more, I told them I'm no longer organising any fundraisers for them in the future. The local mosque organised a big meeting to talk about how they would endorse one candidate and vote for one candidate. So there was magnificent things, and the magnificent demonstration against the genocide in Gaza that came out of the constituency was one that I marched on, and I was allowed to speak at the end because I had been endorsed by most of the Palestinians who were involved in the protests over Gaza. And so I think our campaign was brilliant, and I agree with Michael really, what Michael said about the local issues. One of the things I said was, I reject the narratives that are put out by the BBC. One of the narratives was that there's no money. There's no money available and nothing can be done. And we said, well, what about the £42 trillion that was made globally during the pandemic? And why is it that 65% of that went to the 1% most wealthy people? There's always Sheffield stand up to racism, and we were very, very clear that refugees are welcome trans people. We have to stop the divide and rule from taking place, and then we were very, very clear. And so I'm really pleased that certainly independents did so well really in the election. You know, Andrew Feinstein, Michael Lavalette, obviously fantastic that Jeremy Corbyn won his seat. And I think that, you know, the fact that he was sit as part of a body of 3 people who are independents who have been elected into Parliament will make a really real big difference. But we do face a danger. I know the meeting before was on the question of the rise of reform, and we know that reform have got a number of seats. Actually, when we were counting the ballot papers in Sheffield, Reform had done a deal with the STP in Sheffield and didn't stand. There was lots and lots of spoiled ballot papers which said Reform, none of the others, Reform. So we know there is a real danger. And you see, the problem is out of the rats and the sewers of capitalism can come 2 kinds of politics. The politics of despair, where you scapegoat and blame somebody else, or the politics of hope, which is why I believe it is so important that we on the left get together to make sure that there is a proper representation for people at all future elections. And I'm really I think it would be really good if we could organise a series of meetings around the country of the left where we start to organise that left. I will be going back to the people in my constituency and we will sit down and talk about how we've done, what we can do better. I think there may even be a local council seat that comes up and we may stand and think about standing for that. Just finally, just to say, free Palestine, occupation is a crime, and zero resistance.
Our final speaker, thanks for coming in. I don't know if you've had a chance to catch your breath. It's Claudia Webbe, who was the former Labour MP in East Leicester, but you stood as an independent.
Yes, I've been an independent member of parliament for some time. I think it's like 4 years now. So I was elected in 2019 as a Labour MP. But you will have seen how under Starmer's Labour they have purged and purged and purged. That has left people like me in parliament as an independent member of parliament. And actually, I wonder if that wasn't to my benefit in some respects, because I cannot imagine being a Labour Party member of Parliament, having to squirm and squint, look over your shoulder at what the leader wants you to do. And so I've been able to raise important issues whilst I was a member of Parliament for Leicester East, on issues that mattered to my community, and in spite of the right-wing fascist hate that I received, and in spite of a local Labour machinery that didn't support necessarily the issues that I raised, from Indian farmers to Tamil genocide to Gaza and the massacre and genocide of Palestinian people, to all the issues of poverty and garment workers striking, well rather garment workers facing the exploitation that they face without anybody speaking up for them in Parliament all these years. I of course no longer am a member of Parliament because I stood as an independent, and of course when we organised this event, I don't suppose we imagined that we would be here 3 days after a general election. I don't think that's what we planned when this event was being organised. But we are where we are. We had a general election in which the issue of Palestine played a material role in the outcome. Don't let us ever forget that. When people say, I lost Leicester East to the Tories, yes, the Tories now have Leicester East. They're one gate in the whole country. I don't feel any shame. Because in this general election, we came very close on the issue of Palestine to play an even bigger role when the independent candidates come in within a whisker of toppling Labour candidates who previously sat on large majorities. These results came despite the efforts of the political and media establishment, the media refusing to give appropriate airtime to independents during the campaign, while saturating their broadcast with the far right reform parties. Our campaign was not about how many Tories we let through. Our campaign was about the rise in the share votes of independents. And we saw the rise in the share votes of independents up and down the country. Because even in those places we saw hustings after hustings after hustings where Labour refused come and present themselves to voters. We saw that. And refused to engage with voters as a result, because they knew they would be challenged over their leaders' complicity in the mass murder and maiming of Palestinians. But we also saw an object lesson how more than ever our whole political system is constructed against real representative politics. Labour winning a huge majority on a smaller share of the split the Tory vote. Labour winning a huge majority on a smaller share of the vote than 2017 and a significantly lower number of votes than the 2019 campaign. They had the audacity to call a disaster. Helped by a far-right party that split the Tory vote over and over to allow a managerial right-wing Labour Party to win. Let's not make any doubt about that. And ensure that the security state and neoliberalism continues to have its representation in Parliament. That bodes well, really, for the people. This representation in Downing Street that we are now seeing with one Tory neoliberalism replaced by another Tory neoliberalism bodes not so well for the plight of the Palestinians, because we now have a regime that I think will be prepared to use the most draconian measures to suppress protest, particularly protest for peace and freedom for the Palestinians. But there is also cause for hope. Labour's results in terms of vote share, shows how deeply the issue of Palestine is, and the refusal of Keir Starmer and his cohort to stand up for humanity and justice have bitten in the consciousness of the people. Not just Palestine, of course. We're talking about anti-refugee racism, serial dishonesty, and a clear refusal to commit to any social or democratic injustice. This has disgusted people up and down the country, and at least wearied many. And the instinct toward socialism is what really we are seeing in our society. But we must never compromise on people's understanding of socialism and take it for granted. We have to champion this to give meaning to it in people's everyday life. But it has been the issue of Palestine that has galvanized the movement for far beyond the usual. And I know they're trying to get me to stop, but I've come a long way from that. Not only are we demanding that they shut down Elbit, protest, but as an independent candidate, the galvanization of people never before engaged in politics to get behind my campaign was historic. We cannot go backwards, we can only go forwards. We have to crystallize awareness of how corrupt and inhumane the establishment is. We sought to defeat the establishment. We said that we needed to be united and strategic. Those of us on the left. It also exposed, certainly my campaign, those who claim to be on the left, those who claim to be pro-Palestinian. Because if you were pro-Palestinian, you wouldn't be standing against me. That's wind up and say that we have a huge potential, but it's a lesson we have to learn. We have to be even more resolute on the issue of Palestine and prepare ourselves to resist. The people of Gaza cannot wait for justice and an end to the murder. And as I said, the instinct to socialism is wide and deep. The complicity of our media and political classes are clear. They want to keep us ignorant of political reality. We have to guard against people's disillusionment and give hope so that they don't, or as we saw in this election, stay at home and not vote at all, or to support fascism. But that is what the media and political classes do, and it's not going to change, at least not unless we make it happen. But we have to grasp and raise class consciousness that will force that change. We now need to take place and learn the lesson that we cannot afford disunity or pluralism, or to displace our energies and our fury scattered. And in that, the mass movement for Gaza is both hope and a lesson. And I'm going to end on this, as I move quickly, to say, we need to think how we build and move forward a movement on the left to counter the growth of fascism and the far right. Predicated on the power of billionaires and the poverty of millions. We have to move forward. There is hope. Let us do this together in unity. Thank you.
It's a bit of a mouthful, but I come from Iceland and I'm a member of the Socialist Party in Iceland. I wanted to give you a little bit of a background of what we're facing in Iceland because it's very similar to what you're facing here. We are a grassroots party that started in 2017. We founded it on 1st of May 2017. It's a broad church, anywhere, I would say, from disillusioned left social democrats throughout the whole left spectrum. We started focusing on the trade union movement, and we managed to win 80% of our slate, won 80% of the votes in the second biggest trade union in Iceland, based in Reykjavik. So there was a lot of anger simmering in society. Part of it was because what we felt as was the betrayal of the traditional parties of the left in Iceland, the Social Democrats and the left Greens, which are neither left nor green today, went to a coalition government with the Conservative of all parties in 2017, and that was kind of the catalyst to start the party. So we are building it up. We managed to get representatives, 2 representatives, and 9% of the vote in Reykjavik City Council in the last election. We are building up grassroots. We built up a media empire. It's a web-based television, radio, and text-based programming. It's all based on our volunteers. But one of the things that I wanted to say finally, and keep it short, is that what we felt now is that we were struggling with engaging people, getting people engaged in the struggle, especially young people. But the Palestinian genocide and the fight in Palestine is actually worked so well to recruit people to the cause. This is an opportunity because the anger is tremendous in the society, and this opportunity to have a broad-based coalition on the left is very important. We have to take that to us.
Well, thanks very much to all the speakers. I mean, these were a brilliant set of results if you look at the people represented here, but also if you look wider. And of course, as people have said, this is about Palestine, and Palestine has shifted politics. We got rid of Suella Braverman, and we've had now, there's 5 independents, that's unprecedented, elected, and many more who can win council seats or who can win again when it comes to the next election. So I think all of that's very, very important for us. But Of course, we know that the question of building a new left alliance, people have said here, it's much harder when you have to fight as an independent. We didn't know how close Leanne was to winning in North Ilford, otherwise we would have had more people going over there. And in fact, Labour didn't know how close she was to winning because they told everybody to go to Islington North on the afternoon of the election because they thought that Jeremy Corbyn quite rightly was going to take half the vote. So they didn't know either. They had no idea this was going to be as deep as it was. Now every Birmingham seat is a marginal seat from being safe Labour seats everywhere. And I have to say, building a left alternative outside of Labour is incredibly important. I was quite appalled that John McDonnell on election night said, now's the time to let Jeremy Corbyn back.
Idiot.
I mean, who does he think was fighting against Jeremy Corbyn? They say everybody in there, Tom Watson, Paul Mason, all these people, and they did it absolutely deliberately. They fought against him harder than they fought against reform, is the truth. So that is... The question of reform is a very, very serious thing. You see, you can't just fight on Palestine. And the Muslim community doesn't just fight on Palestine. It's a racist insult to suggest that's the only thing they care about. They care about reform. So we have to bring these things together. Thank you very much.
So what I just wanted to say very, very briefly was that I think it's absolutely incredible how the movement for Palestine over the past 7 months has created a shift, not just on the ground, but electorally as well. What we see with billions of people coming out all across the country is a reflection in Parliament. I don't know how many people on the panels that are speaking today would have stood if it was not for the Palestine movement rocking the country over the past 6 months. Perhaps more than that. And I think that what's important is that we can repeat the same thing again for anti-racism. That is going to be the next big issue in our society. We can see it all across Europe, and we can see it in this country as well. So what I think we all need to see is that people speaking on this panel, coming to the Toy Robinson demonstration on the 27th of this month, we see people taking the issue of anti-racism seriously, and we need to build a left alternative that is capable of taking on not just the issue of Palestine, not just the Tories, not just the issue of cuts, but everything wrong in our society.
I'm from South Dorset, and I want to argue how urgent I think it is that the independents who won and the movement as a whole unite around this and put out a call. Because I think, as people have said, you can't underestimate the shift. If you think to 1997, when Blair was elected, you know, you could talk about privatisation, people would think you were lying. Now Jonathan Ashworth promised he was going to privatise the NHS, and look what happened to him. Show how iron, you know. Looking at what in South Dorset, we're very proud. We dumped Richard Drax, Reform got 20% of the vote. We know the racism that can be stirred up in the area over Billy Stockholm barge. We had an independent stand in South Dorset, but she didn't link up with people. She got 189 votes, it was great. She had the Palestine flag at the camp. But what people are saying is we need a real movement here, and we're not just looking at votes. If we're going to do it differently, we've got to link the votes to the movement, and that's the key.
So I've got the
member of Parliament in Ireland for the people before conference. I just want to really commend Michael and Andrew and Maxine and Claudia and Jeremy for offering people the alternative that is so desperately needed, because Gaza is a litmus test for, you know, the decency of and the credibility of any politics. We know the Tories were going to fail that test, but Labour have failed it disgracefully. It is so urgent that people have that alternative. and undoubtedly in Ireland, similarly where we've had mass movement on the streets of people outraged at our government's failure to impose sanctions on Israel, this was a huge issue in the recent, because we also had elections, and we had, of course, elections in the north where people before profit also stood, and in both cases in Belfast and Derry, their votes went up, and in the local elections, we came out with more council seats than we had gone in the previous election. So the points that have been made about having to link the question of Palestine, the genocide, opposing all the political system, whether it's so-called Labour or Tories who are complicit with this genocide, with the stuff on the ground that is affecting working class people, is absolutely critical. And it was very, very clear in the recent Irish elections that that was the case. In 2020, Sinn Féin and the left looked like we were on the road in the forthcoming election in Ireland to replace Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, the right-wing parties, and to see for the first time a left-wing government. In the recent elections, while we, a smaller force on the left, made advances, Sinn Féin's vote substantially declined. And the reason they declined is because they wobbled badly on the issue of immigration. They made concessions on the question of scapegoating asylum seekers and talked about having to enforce immigration controls, and they also wobbled on the issue of Palestine by sending people to Washington on St. Patrick's Day and shaking hands with the American administration. If you make concessions, it would be a disaster for the project that we have to build. We have to link the mass movement on the solidarity with Palestine to a struggle for the day-to-day things that are affecting working class people, the housing crisis, the health crisis, the cost of living crisis.
Can you hear me? So thank you so much for your contributions both today and everything you've done for your constituency and will continue to do. My question is kind of related to a point that was made earlier, that it's about challenging the notion that Muslims only voted over Palestine. My question is around the fact that why is Palestine constantly framed as a single issue vote? Because actually what Palestine stands for is anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, anti-racism, also anti-establishment. It's about class, it's about women's rights, it's about gender rights as a whole, including anti-Orientalism and orientalizing of Muslim and racially minoritized men. It's about literally every component of mother's rights, anything and everything, children's rights. So why is it always framed as a single vote issue, and also how can we challenge that and reframe it in a way that it doesn't connect to different oppressed communities in the UK, including, let's say, for example, I think Michael made the point that white working class people turned to reform because of the fact that they understood it as anti-establishment. So how can Palestine then reframe to actually reshape that entire notion?
Thank you to the speakers, and look, I think people have said that there were a number of shockwaves throughout the election, but I think the one that we have to celebrate is the shock that the Labour Party got of the success of all of the independent candidates, those on the panel, but all the others that had a brilliant vote as well. And people have said that we know that this is the significance of the Palestine movement, a vote for Gaza, but as others have said, a vote for a system that is rotten to its core, a system that produces imperialism and war, and one that people clearly want to fight against, and know that Keir Starmer's Labour Party will do nothing about. And I think as well, the sizable vote of those independent candidates is something we have to celebrate. It was fantastic to have the newly re-elected MP for Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn, here at Marxism Festival yesterday. Solidarity, congratulations to him and the 4 other MPs that got through. But also, it is something we have to celebrate that 2 Labour shadow cabinet ministers lost their seats. Jonathan Ashworth, we've already said, but Thangam Debonair as well. It could have been 3. It could have been West Street in as well. So well done. I just found the vote from Holden and St Pancras. The vote that Andrew took from Keir Starmer shows that we have a movement that is going to fight the Labour Party, but from day one, from even before day one, before they can even get into office. This isn't like the vote which Blair gets in 2005 after the horrors of the Iraq War. We will be against Labour because they've already made their stance clear. We know where they stand in society, and I agree with everything that people have said about the exciting opportunities for the radical left here in Britain. We need to build a movement around Corbyn, around the independents, around the movement of Palestine on the streets that can take on every racist, every reactionary in society. I'm extremely excited about the opportunity of a new project that has the energy and the militancy of the Palestine movement, that can take on the racists in Parliament like Reform, the racists in the streets like Robertson, but takes on the rotten politics of Labour, a movement that says trans rights are human rights, a movement that says refugees are welcome, a movement that says Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, and that is a movement I'm incredibly excited to be building in the future.
All I would say is this: the strength of our unity is in this room, it's up and down the country, it's in our neighbourhoods, it's in our communities. We know that the issue of Palestine, yes, did galvanise and was the tipping point, but it was also the tipping point of many issues that we were already concerned about with the political establishment that we had. We were just being served neoliberalism after neoliberalism with very little challenge in reality. We saw explicitly how His Majesty's opposition, then the Labour Party, offered no real opposition. We saw that opposition come from ordinary people on our streets. Ours is not just a national movement, it's an international movement at that. And so we continue to have to draw alliances, not just here, but across the globe, really, on the issues that matter. And the issues that matter to my constituency at the time was the issue of poverty, of homelessness, of overcrowding. But despite their issues, despite the poverty that they face, 10,000 less in income than the national average, housing that meant that they were living in 32 square feet per person as compared to 3,700 square feet, the national average. Despite all of that, the issue of Gaza remained resolute in people's minds, because it's about the issue of humanity against inhumanity. And I think that that's what unites us, that's what galvanizes us, and this cannot be just for now. We have to keep going and keep going and keep going. Solidarity, my friends.
I want to agree with the comment you spoke of. This is not just an issue in this country. It is a global phenomenon that we're seeing taking place. A polarisation that's taking place where people are moving to the right, but people are moving to the left. The centre cannot no longer hold. It cannot deliver for ordinary people. So I absolutely agree with you. The second thing, I've organised a coach for my area to Tommy Robinson demonstration. It's important that we build as big as possible against the far right, and we make sure as many of us get there as possible. And then finally, I want to agree on the question of Palestine. This is not just a Muslim issue. This is an issue for the whole of humanity. And actually, Muslims are not just interested in the question of Palestine. Funnily enough, when I studied the election, it was lots of people who said to me, we need to talk to the other issues as well, because actually they are all interconnected. They're interconnected. When we talk about imperialism, it's connected. When we talk about colonialism, it's connected. When we talk about the poverty, the money that goes to the rich, this is part of a capitalist system that actually deprives people of the resources they need, that actually creates scarce resources at the bottom and starts to scapegoat and blame another group of people. The thing about Palestine though is it's like a litmus that set the thing alight. It's actually created a mass movement, and the mass movement which is what's given people hope, and that's why it's so important that we continue to build that mass movement. And my final thing is, I'm really, really pleased to have all the people who are on the platform here, but I do think, as well as going back to our communities, we do need to get together. I would like to see, as I said before, a speaking tour across the country where we start to galvanise that movement of people on the left, that we stand in unity together. It's the kind of politics that actually involves local people, gets people involved, doesn't just think we know it all, and that's what I think we need to be doing. Thanks very much.
If I can just continue from Maxine's point. The challenge that we face now is building a real mass-based movement. But it is essential that it is a democratic movement. It is not for a group of us, and I say this as an older white male, it's not for a small group of us to decide what the movement should look like, how it should be structured, how it should be functioned, and who should lead it. If it's going to be democratic, we start by first getting masses of people involved, and then we determine together all of those things. And I agree, one of the key ways to do this is for groups of us to be talking around the country about the political situation at the moment. But I cannot emphasize enough, democratic. And the second thing is, we've got to look beyond what we are now. We've got to be welcoming to others and inclusive. Because the choice that people in Britain and around the world face right now is to respond to a Starmer administration that is the same concoction of permanent austerity, forever wars, and the climate degradation and socio-economic suffering that comes from that. And many people are going to see the alternative to that because of the racism that has become so normalized. They're going to see the alternative as the Farages and worse in all of their countries. And we have to provide them, as the left, with a welcoming home. And the one thing that I would recommend, if you haven't yet read it, a young Welsh working-class academic, Dan Evans, has written a book called A Nation of Shock, about how we on the left, and he comes from the left, have been so poor at including the petty bourgeoisie in our politics, the petty bourgeoisie that have been the driving force of Trumpism, of Faragism, etc., etc. So please all read that book, and then let's get together in our thousands, in our millions. We are not just all Palestinians, but after Keir Starmer's recent comments, we are also all Bangladeshi. We are all human beings who want a more just, a more equal, a more peaceful, and a more democratic world.
So, I just want to take a couple of minutes to do two things. First of all, I was going to say earlier on, I just wanted to got my cafe like many people here, but on Thursday night we decided that we weren't going to have rosettes on our hotels as we went to the town. Instead we had cafes, and one of our colleagues there had a very good sword, so she threw on them. So my cafe now says Preston, Ramallah, West Bank and Gaza, Palestine Day, 4th of July 2024. So that was our way of taking that into the election on its own. There's a couple of people here I want to thank as well, so Eugene, Audrey, Sue, Jane and Wolf, because they walked the streets of Preston with us and we needed hundreds of those people over the last 6 weeks, so thanks very much for them. But I want to finish really with this. You know, the last time that we had some sort of electoral breakthrough, I was probably at Marxism talking about the exact same things as part of Respect. And if you think of the election in 2006, Respect got George Galloway elected, Lindsay German got 20%, Salo Jacob got in the 20s, and then the next best result was me. I got 6.7% investment, right? This time, 5 independents are elected. And then, let me just read you some of this. Andrew Feinstein, 18.9. Sophia Nakaz, 19.8. Aftad Nawaz, 20.4. Michael Lavalette, 21%. Noor Begum, 23.4%. Faiza Shaheen, 25.7%. Amjad Mansour, 30.5%. Liane Mohammed, 32.2%. Ahmed Nakud, 33.2%. 9 other people got results that are in the 20s or around the 20% in the first past the post electoral system. We have a responsibility to make sure that those votes, those campaigns don't disappear, and that we build something that is sustainable, because we have never been at a more important part in our history. We cannot give the ground of anti-establishment politics to reform. We cannot allow their sore and racism to fester in our communities. We have to go out, each and every one of us, in our tens, in our thousands, in our millions. We have to go out and win those debates in our estates, up and down the country. But today we are in a better place than we have been for a generation, future selves.